Good morning and good afternoon or good evening, depending on your time zone today. Welcome. My name's Rosie, if you don't know me already. Welcome to our final practitioner event for the year. It is lovely to see all your faces. You're welcome to turn your camera on if you like. Oh, I can see some familiar faces there. Hi, Kelly, Sarah, some people I haven't seen for a while. Anne Herman, hello, welcome from across the sea. Some familiar, some new. Casey, your name's familiar, but I don't know if I've met your face before. Have I seen? No. Hi, nice to meet you. Welcome. Welcome. I'm just going to wait another minute for some more people if they start to enter. But today we have 3 wonderful practitioners who are going to share some activities with us. Well, I just found page 2 of my friendly faces. Hello, page 2. Nice to see you there. Sorry, I missed you from before. Let's go back to page 1, the friendly faces. Hello, page 1. Oh, lots of people today for the end of the year, which is exciting. Feel free to let us know in the chat what exciting plans you might have for the Christmas period. When do you break up from work? If you get to break up from work, in fact. Okay, I'm going to share my screen, which means I won't be able to see your lovely faces as clearly. Okay, just reorganizing some things here. All right, so today's session will be recorded and you will be able to access that recording after the session. Probably next week. Won't put too much pressure on us. There's a lot to get done. All right, let me just see if I can see some more faces there. There we go. So just give me a thumbs up if you can see my slide deck. That would be lovely. Excellent. Okay, well, welcome. For those who do not know me, my name is Rosie, full name Rosamie, in case you've heard that too. And I am very happy to be hosting this webinar or practitioner forum, which is all about the gift of giving. So I reached out to a couple of practitioner colleagues of mine, of which you all are, and asked if they might be open to sharing some of the activities that I had either heard directly or overheard they'd been running throughout the year. And I asked if they would be happy to share them and kind of gift them to our wider practitioner network with some ideas for further application and use of whole brain thinking and the HBDI. And they very kindly agreed. So I'm going to I'm going to be the timekeeper today. I've got my green thinking hat on. Just started the timer. So I'm very happy to welcome them and I'll introduce them shortly. But if you don't know me, my name's Rosie and I'm one of the master practitioners working with Herman. I would like to change my slide. Yes, and I would like to welcome you to country. So if you're from Australia, this may be familiar to you. It's now that I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome you to our session and to acknowledge the Jagera and Turrbal people as the traditional custodians of the land on which we learn today. I'd also like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. And as we come together to connect and learn, let us recognise the importance of understanding and respecting the traditional custodians of our land. You can see on the map there all of the different tribes, and this is the Indigenous map of Australia. If you're not from Australia, you might be wondering why I'm sharing this. And the purpose of the Welcome to Country is to promote respect, understanding and recognition of the Indigenous culture and also highlight the deep and enduring connection that they have to the land. It's really about emphasising the cultural, spiritual and historical significance that our traditional custodians play. And it really provides an opportunity to foster a sense of unity and shared responsibility for the well-being of our land and that community. If you know the traditional custodians of the land on which you work and play and learn, you are welcome to share them in the chat. Thanks, Jeanette, for doing that. I also have a website, which I'll have to find it and save it. It's a wonderful website if you'd like to learn more about Indigenous culture in Australia. It's the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders Studies. And I can't type it off the tip of my tongue while I'm talking, but I will get that website and put it in the chat if you are interested to learn more about the culture. So while I welcome you from an Australian perspective, I'd also like to recognise that we have global diversity in our room today, and I'd like to extend the welcome to all of the individuals from all of the cultures and diverse backgrounds in the workshop. So I'm going to use this map to recognise the cultural diversity that does exist in our session today. So what I'd love for you to do is to find the annotate tool. Now, the annotate tool lives, if you look at the top of the screen, it will say you are viewing Rosie Hart's screen. I believe that's what it says. And you'll see a little downward arrow. And if you click on that arrow, you're going to be able to select the annotate tool. And when you get there, you can choose a stamp or a text or a circle. And what I'd love you to mark is your cultural diversity. So I'd love to know where your culture originates from, not necessarily where you live now, but where your traditional culture comes from. So mine is in Kiwi land in New Zealand over there. You can see my star. And also there's quite a lot of Scottish ancestry in my life. Feel free to add your cultural diversity to the map. I haven't done it with this color map before. I think I'm going to turn it black and white, the map, next time. Sorry about that. Top tip, color on color. It's not friendly. But let's have a look at this perhaps diversity. We've got Australia, New Zealand, States, UK, Europe, someone in Finland. Oh, South Africa. Wonderful, diverse. We could get some more diversity. We'll seek it out. Okay, I'm going to pause that there. Part of what I'm doing today is just modeling some activities that you can use yourselves. So I'm going to clear all of that. And then I'm going to move to our next page. So not only do we have cultural diversity today, but we also have thinking diversity. So it's now that I would like to, since we all know about this whole brain thinking model, I'd like to recognize the thinking diversity of the group. So again, select the annotate tool, a stamp, a star, a pen, and I'd love you to mark, and this is what I say, that's my timer, I've got no seconds left, your average location on the map. Where does your thinking tend to congregate on average? You can click your little mark. We've got quite a lot of clicks coming out there in the yellow. We have a little bit of green, some red. Just give you another minute to see what happens on this thinking diversity map. So just as we use a map like the globe to understand our world, so too do we use the whole brain thinking model to understand our thinking brain. It is a map to understand our thinking processes, and it gives us tips and insight into that. Okay, thank you for that. And I hope that was a, oops, sorry, I need the annotate tool back. Helpful introduction and way to think about the diversity of our group today. I would now love to introduce the session. Oh, quick overview. What are we doing? 3 practitioners are going to share an activity of how they facilitated whole brain thinking in the HBDI within their context. They each will have 15 minutes to share, so I better stop talking. We've got Matt Wright, Alison Marshall, and Clare Linane who are here to present today. And why are we doing this? Well, the the knowledge of this network is vast, and I would love to hear from more people who have additional activities. These three individuals have kindly agreed to share their experiences. So without further introduction, let me move on to Matthew Wright, who is going to share with us an icebreaker activity for a memorable online experience. And I will hand over to Matt. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosie, and thank you for the wonderful introduction and activities. And again, what a great exemplar you are in terms of bringing people in with such warmth and red thinking. Bit of yellow probably too. So if we can have the next slide, please, Rosie. I'll just say one or two things about myself. I'm a 1311 thinker, and my one thinking comes from my education, because for my sins I studied engineering and I call myself a recovering engineer now. So I still relate to that sort of thinking, but I've also built on it and started to express more of my yellow and red. But you can also see I'm very low in the green. So I have to put a lot of energy into doing presentations in terms of slides and proposals and things, not things that I especially enjoy, but I still have to do them and not excuse myself. You can see by my background up there, I'm from Wiradjuri country. That's a picture from the farm where I grew up of the sky. And I thought to myself, interestingly, it's got combinations of yellow, red and blue in there, but not much green, just a bit of green trying to sneak in from the side. So it gives you a sense of where I'm coming from. I've been involved in this area for, 16 years now, but prior to that, I was a teacher in a Steiner school. So I've had a very diverse career, and I consider myself very fortunate to have done that and to have been accredited in Herman thinking since 2007, was it? 2013. So next slide, please. All right, so back in 2019, people at Herman suggested that I might like to take on a big challenge, and it came from one of the big four consulting firms, accounting and consulting firms, I won't name them. And they had this program of digital accelerators where they were taking people out of the business, and then they were giving them some digital uplift in terms of skills and awareness, and then putting them back into the business in such a way that their knowledge and experience would expand throughout the business. It was a 6-month program, and part of the first week was an intense session where they had several 2-hour sessions, mostly presented in-house presenters, but not all. And I was to present the HBDI to them. The first one was face-to-face. So that was kind of the balloon activity, which some of you might know, down at Darling Harbour by the water. It was a memorable experience, but never to be repeated as far as I know, because we've been through 8 cohorts now and all the rest have been online, which creates a level of anxiety for those of us with low preference for detail and not having control, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but we've got through it. One of the great things was a very supportive internal team, and they welcomed me into their offices. So they helped me with the technology, and we had a practice session to work out the technology the week before, and they surrounded me with support to make that happen really, really positively. So they helped reduce my anxiety. But nevertheless, in presenting to up to 130 people would know that that can cause a little bit of stress, but we managed that by and large. So next slide, please, Rosie. So the why. So in these presentations, they have grown and they have evolved. We do a review session after every one. But my intention was to make the clarification or the development an understanding of their profiles as memorable, impactful, and sticky as possible. So they had all done the thinker journey. They all had their profiles, so they were ready to go. And as each cohort went through, the pressure got higher and higher to do even better and better. And they used to measure our presentation out of 5. And the last time we scored 4.9. So we were pleased with that. But I wanted to step it up a bit, and I wanted to help them recall their colleagues' profiles. We all know that the language of HBDI is easily taken on by participants, but mostly they might have a half day or a day to do that. In their situation with only 2 hours and with 120 people, we wanted to lift that to another level. So we also hope that they would take it on and use it again in future workplaces and in their own workplace. So moving on to the next slide, please, Rosie. So the process, I said, as they had done the thinker journey and had their profile, and I had the idea that it'd be nice for them to come dressed as their profile. Now, lucky for me, the steering group pushed back and said, how about we allow them to either dress as their profile or have a background as their profile? And that ended up to being a bit of a masterstroke, as you'll see in a moment. So they're allowed to design their background or come dressed as it. As many of you know, often you get early arrivals, sometimes, green thinkers. And it's nice to be able to make a comment about the background and find out a bit about the person while you're waiting for the other people to join. The other thing we did was we pushed it hard early. We made sure that they all knew what was going to happen, and maybe we created a little bit of a FOMO or even a fear of not being part of the crew by supplying some prizes and stepping up the energy around how they presented themselves. And the steering group, as I said earlier, were very keen to get a group photo. So all of this happened. We got them all online, and they started appearing, and all of these amazing colours appeared, and I could still remember some of them. And we're going to show you the slide now. As to how it turned out, it's not everybody because they took the photo at the end of the session. A few had dropped off. But let's see how it looked, Rosie. So I was so happy with this photo, and there's just so much in it. You can see myself on the top left there with my shirt, which is no green, just red, yellow, and blue, but it's not nearly as noticeable as the backgrounds of many of the people. The fourth guy along there, Cedric, he dressed up. He had red sunglasses, a yellow hat, an amazing background. And I can recall his name 6 months later very easily. But then there was amazing things like James on the second row, Rosie, about 6 across. It turns out he was high green, but he was also a competitive lawn bowler and a very highly accomplished lawn bowler. We'll never forget him. You can also see some really interesting ones there, and a couple I've decided to point out is where there are on the bottom left, you can see a yellow-green preference. So we might make assumptions about Rebecca, whether she's yellow or green, but it'd be nice to ask questions about how that plays out in her life, that diagonal tension that we often highlight in our stuff. There's also one around the middle there, which is low in the second row again, in the middle lowest row is yellow-green. And you might even want to look for a red-blue one, which I found on the bottom row there, Brian. So, tell us, Brian, what's going on there for you? How does that play out in your life? Because we might assume you're high red, we might assume you're high blue from your behaviours. So tell us how the opposite plays out. You can see some other amazing creative presentations there. I love the one of Nick Zapier with the red and the green chilies in the second row. and Duncan next to that with the yellow and blue IKEA. So that might inspire a few more questions about his profile. Second row and third across, we've got Chelsea Brumby, who's red and yellow, and life-saving. I'm not sure whether she's used that picture in order to tell us about her hobbies or just because it's convenient, red and yellow. But once again, some really great access to some conversations. You can also see down the bottom right, part of the team. So Fiona in the green there, but highly red, and she's got the red glasses on, and Tracy and me in the room there. And so any other questions that people might have? Anything that you noticed that you'd like to point out? Okay, let's move on then. Next slide, please, Rosie. So what was the impact of all of this? And I recognise that not all of you are going to be presenting online to 100 people, but some of the outcomes are more general. And I certainly think the first one, that for early arrivers, it gives you something to talk about other than the weather. I always like to ask people where we find them today, but also for having a sense of their profile up front can also help us ask the right questions. And another thing we learned was that sometimes blue and green can be more introverted, so we may not push them too early. We might encourage some of the high reds and yellows to share with us early, and that allows others to warm up and step in. Certainly lifted the energy of the group and made it something quite different to what they were experienced from their internal presenters on things like design thinking and agile thinking and so on. And as I mentioned, it was memorable to them in terms of the colour, but also about their own profiles and remembering where other people sat in such a short session. I also think that when they went into breakout rooms, we had 2 or 3 breakouts during this 2-hour session. And they already had some information about the people they were going into the breakout room with. And we actually did some activities where we clustered people in their own similar colours and asked them to think from the perspective of the diagonally opposite. If we're addressing a group of people who were diagonally opposite colour to them, how would they go about it to get them to step out of their natural thinking preference? I am sure they'll do it again for cohort 9, and that's likely to happen early next year. And from the perspective of the steering group, I also think it provided an anchor for them, for those visual people, and for the Herman team themselves to be promoting how these sorts of things can work and how the reticence many of us have to present online can be overcome, and you can use some of the positives about it to complement the challenges that we all know about by now. So those were the main things I wanted to say. Rosie and the team, do you guys have any questions, or does anybody else have any questions? Oh, by the way,
I have a question, Matt.
Yep. Yeah, Louise.
My question is, I noticed you've got there on that slide, you know, if blue or green thinkers, we might not push them too early, but underneath that, some of the very high yellows and reds stood out. So I'm guessing they stood out because they were verbally louder, happy to talk, comfortable to speak, whereas you're sort of saying the blue and green were a bit quieter, needed time to think a little more. So I'm interested to know, how did you create the space for the blue and green people to speak and I say this in the nicest way, get the red and yellow people not to speak?
Yeah, touche. Great question, Louise. And again, we're talking about generalizations here, and it's important to recognise that all 4 quadrants have their extroverted and introverted versions All right. So, you know, we don't want to make too many assumptions about these things.
Sure.
But what I was talking about, like, it was something about a person like Cedric, who is obviously quite out there, and to get somebody filling the what Rosie calls the crickets. You know, when you want somebody to start to share, I might call on Cedric before I called on somebody who's presenting in, you know, in a slightly different way. Now, these are only hints, of course, you know, so we have to be very careful about pigeonholing people. The other thing is that people, once you've got it going, people will start to get themselves. Oftentimes I will call on people and to see if they would like to offer something, but we all know that can put pressure on them. But nevertheless, it was just more of an entree to say, if I had to ask somebody, who would I ask first? And then I might encourage others to jump in. As you point out, have little tactics like, that's a really great question, Cedric, or you're making some really great points, Cedric. Maybe we could take that offline and have another conversation with that in the chat or after the session, and allow some other thinkers to speak. Does that answer your question, Louise?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks.
Well, thank
Great
you.
one.
I'm going to butt in here because I'm keeping time. I've got my green thinking hat on. And thank you so much. So we're going to move on, but a round of applause for Matt. And I'm also going to just pick up on some language there. So when we talk about these quadrants, I really want us to be careful that we say green thinkers, red thinkers, not red people, blue people, because we have to really put ourselves in that language of this is about your thinking, because it's less threatening then. And so if you find that a group, like if you say, oh, the blues don't want to talk, the blue people don't want to talk, well, you might want to say, can we hear from some blue thinking, please? I'd like to hear. And it takes away that personal element a bit. And it's one of the things that our thinkers tell us is they like about it is that we don't stereotype. And we don't, you know, you're only blue, you're only green. So there's two sides to that argument, of course, and I can go into it another time, but just really be careful of language around the blue thinkers, the green thinkers, and use that as a frame to extend the conversation. I think that was really a great question and really well sort of picked up on as well while we talk about the colors and the quadrants and the thinking that we're trying to draw out. So thank you so much. And thank you for asking questions and connecting. There's Matt's email. You're welcome to put your email in the chat. If you'd like to connect with Matt further, I asked him and he said, yes, I'm happy to connect with these people. So if you want to ask him more questions, go deeper, you can connect with Matt there. All right, let's move to Alison Marshall. Alison Marshall is a lovely practitioner from New Zealand. I'm going to let her tell us a couple of things about herself and take the reins.
Great, thanks, Rosie. Well, kia ora, everyone from Aotearoa. Great to be here. We're a little bit ahead of you time-wise, so not quite midday. Well, it's 3 o'clock here, or 3:30 now. So just a little bit about myself. I've been working in the learning and development area for a long time, and have been self-employed for about 5 years. And HBDI was one of the certifications that I did that I wanted to add to my toolkit. And I have used it a lot, particularly with teams. So the example that I'm going to talk about with you today is primarily I've used in team sessions, and I have occasionally used it also in individual group sessions, but it is really to help teams understand how to practically experience and use whole brain thinking. And the exercise that I designed was also to help to demonstrate that it doesn't have to be complicated or onerous. It actually can be, it's actually quite an easy, natural thing to do. So Rosie, I'll get you to flick on to the what. So the exercise itself is designed around using a real world problem that the team would like to start to problem solve. And in the initial meeting with the client, generally I'll ask them to think of an exercise or a problem that we could use in the exercise. so that people feel that they're not only getting to experience whole brain thinking, but they're actually going to practically work on a problem that they are actually facing. And so if we move on, Rosie, I'll get into the why. So one of the reasons that I was really keen to, as I mentioned before, to get people to experience doing this exercise is because it really, to Rosie's point, helps people really understand where their thinking is, and especially in terms of mental effort and the energy it might take to use lesser preferences, and also the natural ease that people have when they're using more preferred preferences. I think the other benefit of this exercise, which I'm going to give you more detail on in a moment, is that it's a safe place for people to view other options or more diverse ideas that aren't coming from their thinking preferences. And it's a really great way to do it in a way that isn't threatening, and it doesn't put people in a position where they feel they have to defend their perspective or maybe where their thinking is actually coming from. And naturally, as I mentioned before, it gives people that a takeaway to take back into the workplace, and some potentially out of the box thinking that they may traditionally not have come up with if they were just sitting in a team meeting or as a team trying to solve a problem. So let's get into how it works. So as I mentioned, the client provides a real world problem for the team to work on, and we'll give you some scenarios next. But basically what we do is have 4 flip charts or whiteboards around the room. The flip chart or the whiteboard represents a thinking quadrant, and people start at their highest scoring quadrant, and then they move around to their least, lesser preferred or least scoring quadrant as last. And they get to spend 5 minutes discussing solutions to the problem in quadrant. And then, as I said, they move on, ending at their least preferred. So as you can well imagine, it starts really high energy, and there's a lot of discussion at each flip, and the ideas come out pretty quickly. And even when the second round, it is still that way. But of course, as people get into the third and fourth thinking quadrants, there's less energy, and it takes people more effort. And usually at the third thinking quadrant, I'll usually call out, look, hey, this is a great example of how thinking can work in real life, but isn't it great that there have been people here before you that have this thinking quadrant as their highest scoring or their preference. And then we end, and of course we all get to look at the results and some of the ideas. And some of the talking points can often be around, what that was like to experience the energy as we move through quadrants, thinking about a problem. Also, what it was great to be able to view what other people had come up with as potential solutions, and that helped often because they could build on those ideas. I tend to use it to wrap up that team session. So Rosie might move on to the examples. So these are just some of the example scenarios that I've worked with teams, and that's just a small sample of scenarios. I think the trick is to encourage people not to get too complicated or too complex, to actually make sure that the problem is real, but it's not a really something that will take more than 5 minutes to start actually coming up with some potential solutions. I often always ask the client to think about framing it as a how might we question, because it encourages that more divergent thinking versus convergent thinking. So that is what I do. I'm probably faster than 10 minutes. Sorry, Rosie. Yeah, I guess, has anyone got any questions or any comments, or have I explained it sufficiently so that you've got a good feel for what we do?
Hi, Ali. It's Sarah here. I've got a question.
Yeah.
I really like the idea of having a real world problem. When people go around the flips, do you find that sometimes they code things on the wrong flip? And how do you deal with that? You know, so they've got like a blue idea on a yellow flip or something.
Yeah, I don't know if you can, it's really hard, I think, with ideas or solutions to be that, you know, like it could be that you're looking at it through a different lens, a different quadrant thinking lens. It's kind of like, I often use cooking as a really great example for that, right? You know, some people cook because they want to experiment. Some people do it because they want to be social and share with their family. And some people will follow the recipe to the letter. So we don't sweat about that. You know, if there's anything that looks really odd, you can call it out, but I would always talk about it as looking at it through that quadrant's lens and how that might translate or play out. I don't know if that was helpful, Sarah.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is that you don't sweat it. So
No,
unless it's glaring,
yeah. The key really is that people get to experience how you could just change. You know, you can move around the quadrants and everyone starts, you know, with their most preferred. It's really high energy, and that's what people bring. That's their superpower, if you like, or that strength that they're bringing, and the diversity of ideas that come out. And it's not one solution that potentially is going to solve the problem. It might need, you know, to look at it from many different perspectives to get that whole brain solution.
I think that's a lovely question. And I'll just butt in. If you've got more questions, just put them in the chat because I want to keep us on time. But I'll just share a real example of how that played out, what Ali's describing, where people put words in the perceived incorrect quadrant. So we were talking about in a session the word framework. And if you think, so we had two thinkers talking about this word. One thinker was like, the framework is just the guide. It's just a general guideline to give me sort of what I should be thinking about. It's quite gray and ambiguous now, using these hand movements like this. And the other thinker was going, no, framework is a structure and it's a box, and we need to have that box in order to understand what we have to do and how it's going to work and how we move forward. And they were having this debate in real time about the word framework. And when I said, hey, let's pause here, I said to the rest of the group, what thinking are you seeing show up with this one word of framework? And they could clearly see the yellow perspective, the yellow thinker interpreting the word framework, and the green thinker interpreting the word framework, and how it was different. And then I said, okay, well, if we need a framework to achieve the project, what should our framework look like in this situation? Should it be an ambiguous framework, or should it be a very, very structured and clear, confined, precise framework? And together the group decided that framework should sit in the green quadrant, and that they needed that structure and that clarity and that process, and not the way they've been interpreting this word framework to move forward. So I think that these types of activities bring up these types of conversations about diverse thinking, about perspectives, and then about what do we need to achieve X, Y, Z? Because one of the beautiful things about whole brain thinking it's a problem-solving solution to help us have these discussions and solve the problem. So I think
it's a good example, because you see people, it does play out that way as well with ideas that come out, and that's probably a really great talking point if you do get some commonalities of ideas across quadrants to explore what they potentially mean in each quadrant as well. So yeah, it's great. And I see, Mary, you've got a question around, no, I've never really explored cluster preferences in that exercise with them. No, I haven't. Generally because it's with a team. So, you know, and we're more looking more for that, you know, the energy and the flow or whole brain approach. Yeah, cool. No, and I haven't. And it would probably be a really great way to explore that struggle towards energy. I designed it originally because it emulated the flow of thinking, And so, you know, we always have that starting point, right? But yeah, that might be worth, I might try that next time. Yeah, cool.
I have actually done that in reverse and
Ah,
in both ways. So you need more time, but you do preferred first and then you do least preferred. And it really draws out, when you're trying to get a team to be agile, it draws out the conversation around agility, because they go to their lowest first and there's no talking and it's very quiet. And we stop and we say, what does this mean for agility? What does this mean for stretching? And what does it mean for the task we just set ourselves? So you can do both. It's very interesting.
and Karen, your question around the low energy and real growth dynamics. Yes, it still does. They get to what I think the benefit is with doing it that way is understanding that you know, you can still contribute in a thinking quadrant, because you know, it's not like we can't. And you know, leveraging what others have written is not a bad thing. You know, you don't have to always be the one with the whole original idea. So yeah, they do read, they do use outputs from previous people, I think, definitely. But yeah, that can often help, right? So I think that plays to the fact that we should leverage others' thinking preferences, and that's a great talking point. Arlene, I've never used it in a virtual session. It would probably take a bit of fiddling with breakout rooms. But if you wanted to, if you made the breakout rooms self-select and people really had a clear understanding of what they needed to do, I think that will probably work okay. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to wrap up Ali's wonderful sharing and activity there, because I am in my green timekeeping hat is on, it's playing its role, and we'd love to move to Claire. But thank you, Ali, and a round of applause for Ali. Thank you so much for sharing. Wonderful to hear that activity, how it plays out in the real world, and the experiences and those wonderful questions of the group. Thank you so much. And Mary's going to steal that idea, and this is the gift of giving. This is all about today's session, giving each other ideas to use in the real world. So let's move to Claire. Ali's also kindly shared her email. If you'd like to share it in the chat or connect with Ali, please reach out. We now have Claire, who's going to share an activity for homogenous teams. I'm not going to say any more than that. I'm going to let Claire take over and share.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're all well. I saw at the start we had quite a lot of yellow people sitting up in the yellow quadrant here. So that's my profile there, as you can see. I'm 3211. I have changed. When I first got accredited in 2014, under pressure, my blue would go to 0. And I've tried really hard to develop strategies to change that, because it's not very helpful when your blue goes to 0 under pressure. So that's what it's standing at today. My background is actually as a HR manager, but also I've straddled the learning and development area for a long time. I was accredited in 2014, and it's certainly my favourite tool. It's the most sticky tool. I've been in a Pilates class and had someone come up to me and say, excuse me, you taught me whole brain thinking, and I'm red, and you know, they're still talking about it. And I don't know about any of you others, but I can hop in an elevator at a client and look around and think blue, red, green. I'll remember their colours, even though I don't remember their names. Although it's not the people, as Rosie said, it's their thinking preference, but certainly it stays with me quite often. So before I plan a session, I always ask myself, who am I working with? And then based on those results, I design the workshop to have the maximum impact. So whilst I have a core structure of what I do, my workshops, like many of you, are rarely the same. And today what I want to share with you is a team that I did about 2 months ago now. So they're a senior management team. There was 4 of them. So between them, they managed about 35 people. And so there was the leader of that team who reported into Exco, and then her 3 direct reports. So if you go to the next slide, please, Rosie. These are their results. So you can see that immediately, if we look at just the scores on the left, immediately I could see that there was some homogenous thinking. There was a shared preference of blue thinking. Obviously, I could also see that a couple of them had a green thinking preference, and a couple had a yellow thinking preference. I could also see that none of them had a red thinking preference. Normally the names are up when they see it, but for the purposes of today, I've hidden their identities, obviously. You can also see their average profile scores there on the right. You can see from just looking at that everything goes up slightly under pressure, but yellow goes down. So if you can click next, please, Rosie. So that's them and that's me. So I'm very much a believer with this. And really, when I look at the impact this had on my life and my career, it's when I really embraced this that everything escalated in a positive way. I always think I've got to practice what I preach. You know, I love my natural yellow-red style, and I'm always authentic. But I know that if I make small adaptations and stretches, I can more effectively influence and my impact will increase. And so certainly looking at this group, I thought, okay, I need to get into a bit of blue thinking language to enhance my credibility with them and so on. So if you go to the next slide, please, Rosie. So when I asked myself, who am I working with? I knew that I was working with a group of evidence-based thinkers, and I wanted them to, you know, to see the value of whole brain thinking and this tool as much as I do. But I knew as a homogenous blue thinking team, the best way I could do that was give them proof and let them reach their own conclusion. And so that's what I tried to do. So in a way that was on the screen doesn't sound natural, but actually was very natural because I'm quite practiced at it. I actually started to drop right from the very beginning. I started to drop some blue language and framed it up in a kind of blue way. So if you can click, please, Rosie. So the language I used, not formally like this, but more off the cuff is, you know, today we're going to look at some evidence. We're going to look at the evidence in the form of your BDI results individually and as teams. And even this session we're having this morning, for me, I am continuing to observe and gather evidence. And I'm going to be sharing that with you in real time, if that's okay with you. And once we've done that, we're going to do a bit of analysis. We're going to draw some conclusions and try and identify what are your likely strengths, what are your likely blind spots. And we'll do that with the goal of making sure you achieve results. So it's just scattered throughout my language, and it's something I've learned to do to stretch. But, you know, if I'm in my normal self, not stretching at all, I would never use language like that. I don't use the word evidence and conclusions in my normal life. But I could see right from the very beginning that I had them very engaged because they wanted to feel they weren't about to have kind of a fluffy, airy-fairy session. So if we can go into the next slide, please, Rosie. What I did is I developed a couple of exercises. And what I've found before working with homogenous groups is that you need to show them the value of the other three quadrants. So, for example, just say they're homogenous and they all sit in blue, as in this case. I almost feel like before I teach whole brain thinking or the model, I need them to buy in to the idea that there's value in all four quadrants. There's value in the other thinking styles as well. Because I feel like they don't necessarily have a counterpoint or a counter perspective of someone in their group showing them how valuable red is or how valuable yellow is. So I design an activity or several activities to do before we even start whole brain thinking that I'm going to use later to kind of show them the value of the other thinking styles. I hope that makes sense. So if you could go to the next slide. Yep, show that, please. So what I did was I started by giving them a scenario. And this particular organisation had their new CEO start the previous week. So I said, look, totally hypothetical. You're all taken to an offsite for senior management. And the CEO announces that the working from home policy, which previously you were allowed to do 3 days from home, 3 days in the office and 2 days from home, that the policy was going to be changed. I literally read this out. So we have data to suggest that the current policy is too flexible and is having a detrimental effect on performance. The new policy requires staff to be on site in the office at least 80% of the time, which means they get approximately 1 workday from home per week. And I guess linking back to what Ali was saying, the example I was using, it was relevant, but it's not too complex. This issue from working from home, we're all talking about it at the moment. You as people managers are required to roll this change out to your team and get them on board. In future, the policy might be reviewed with the prospect of increasing the minimum time in the office even further. So I wrote that very much trying to use a little bit of every quadrant. So I knew there was a bit of blue language, you know, with the 80% and the performance language. I knew that the word rollout, you know, was going to hook some greens. Getting the team on board was my red language, and talking about it maybe changing in the future was the blue. So then what I did is I said to them, without discussing this amongst yourselves, I'd like you to pick up one of the post-it notes in front of you, and I would like you to write down your first question for your CEO. And if you can go to the next slide, please, Rosie. I had behind the flip chart, so not where they could see it, but only where I could see it, I had a table like this laid out. So I got them to write down their first question and hand it to me. Thanks, Rosie. Next one. And so round one, all of their questions were in the blue quadrant. So we had, how are we going to, I've got them literally in front of me still, these post-it notes. How are we going to track and report on this? What is the objective of this change? Can you talk me through the key insights? What data insights, you know, they were all blue, and inside myself I was clapping because they were falling straight into my trap, which is my humour, forgive me. But I knew that this was going to be really useful later on. I wasn't sharing with them at the time what the others were saying. I was just saying, okay, thank you. And I should have said before, I had framed these first few activities of, in the spirit of gathering evidence, I'm actually going to do a couple of activities with you now where I observe you. So then I said, okay, what's your next question? And so round two, thanks, Rosie. Round two, they came back, and round two questions, one of them ventured over into green and asked about the time frame. And then again, I repeated it and did round three. Thanks, Rosie. And by the time we got to the round three questions, we did have a red and a more yellow question come out. So for example, somebody said, what's the culture that you're striving for? So I had all this for myself, and I said to them, this has been very helpful to me. And we're going to circle back to this information later on in the session. I then did the other activity that I designed, which we won't go into today. So that's how I started everything. And then I moved on to whole brain thinking. I taught them, you know, the model, the background, they got their individual profile. And finally, fast forward an hour and a half, we're at the point where they're getting their team results. So if you go to that slide, as you just did. So we got to this part where they were looking at their results. And I posed this question, thanks, Rosie. You know, we talked about their strengths. And so then I said, as a team, what are your likely blind spots? And of course, always I let the team draw their conclusions, but I was especially aware with these blue thinkers that that's how they need to reach these conclusions from this data, not be told it. And so finally, well, not finally, it didn't take very long, but they were coming up with some really good potential blind spots. And then one of them finally said, well, look, I see that we're all really good at blue thinking, but I actually wonder, I see we're all really good at blue thinking, but maybe we kind of are all a bit similar. Is there a risk we overlook other things that are actually quite relevant? And that was my cue. So at that point, I said, well, actually, let's have a look at the activities we did earlier. And we looked at 2 of them, but if we can go to the next slide. Thanks, Rosie. I showed them their results and I showed them what they'd asked. And if I had to pinpoint like a penny drop moment in the room where everybody just went silent, it was that moment. And even afterwards, the senior leader in the team said to me, I've recruited in my own image, haven't I? Which was a really great insight. So what we were able to do then is we were able to say, you know, they were able to say, well, actually, we love blue. We do think blue is best, blue thinking. But let's move in and look at what we overlooked. Next slide. Thanks, Rosie. So they were able to then come up with all of these questions that they really needed to think about that they just hadn't considered. And I'm not going to dwell on that now, but it really showed them. It was a really powerful activity, this one and the other one I did, because it gave them their proof. You know, I was working with homogenous blue thinkers and it gave them their proof. They saw what could happen when they didn't consciously try to stretch their thinking style. I'm conscious that we're wrapping up in time. So next slide, please, Rosie. So to finish off, what we did in the workshop is we looked at strategies that we could use to make sure that they did consider all thinking quadrants as appropriate. So the first strategy we used, thanks Rosie, was and there was about 5, but the ones I'm showing you today, we talked about mapping the task. So we went back to that actual task and we said, if we were going to map this task and kind of look at it and give it a preference code based on what's important, which quadrant is screaming out? And they all said red. You know, the actual thing we were asked to do is to get people on board. And really none of us went to that question. So that mapping the task proved to be valuable. The other thing we did, thanks Rosie, is we looked at the strategy of deliberately reversing their process flow. So I was able to show them with the clock image there that I use on the left that, you know, if you had an hour and I threw a task at you, you're likely going to spend your first third of the time in blue, then go to green, yellow, red. And what are the risks? The risks are that you'll miss the red. So then we explored the idea of actually consciously reversing the process flow and how to practice doing that. So to finish off, I'll just say it was a fantastic exercise. I've done it several times now with homogenous groups. For me, the reason that doing the activity at the beginning is so important is because it allows them to see in real time and real life that they will behave according to their thinking preference unless they consciously try to go elsewhere, whether that's blue, green, red or yellow. And that's about it. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Sorry, I'm busy talking to my muted microphone. Let's give Claire a wonderful round of applause. That was wonderful to see that activity. There were a couple of questions that came in and I will answer just quickly to wrap up, but that was awesome. Thanks so much for sharing, Claire. And Claire has also agreed to share her email. So if you'd like to connect with her, please feel free if you want to put that in the chat. I think one of the things that activity, even if they know their thinking, I've done a very similar activity, but I put it after they've got to know their HBDI before teams. So I put the scenario in between the model themselves, scenario, and then teams. And they still perform to type and behave to type, even with awareness. And it's very, very interesting to see that. So I would, there's Claire's email. I would love to thank each of our presenters today for sharing these different activities. So Matt's activity really around like that introduction, that first port, that opening the conversation about yourself and your thinking. That's the essence of that activity, doing it virtually, you know, having a discussion. Moving into Ali's activity, which is around, you know, okay, so what do we do with this? How do we use it? How do we move through every quadrant and not just get stuck in one particular style or process flow? And then into Claire's scenario with those homogenous teams where you have groups of thinkers, they all think in the same way. How do you get them to think differently, to approach something in a different way, to adopt thinking agility? So I would like to thank each of our presenters, as I said. And if you have a great activity or workshop experience that you would like to share at one of these in the future, I am looking for more and I would love for you to share. So please do email me and keep in touch. That's my email on the screen there. But I will wrap up by saying I hope that all of you have a lovely holiday season. And the office, Herman, will be shut for a couple of weeks, but we will be back in January and look forward to working with you more then. Have a lovely break, and we will see you in the new year, 2024. Thanks, everyone.